Listen to me. Some of you right now, you're stuck. Not because you don't have opportunity, not because you don't have talent, but because of your outlook. Your outlook is the lens you see life through. And if that lens is dirty, everything looks dirty. You wake up already defeated. You walk into rooms expecting rejection. You try once and quit because it didn't go your way. That's not life holding you back. That's your perspective. Let me tell you something. Two people can go through the same storm. One comes out broken. The other comes out built. Same storm. Different outlook. Stop asking, why is this happening to me? Start asking, what is this trying to teach me? Because winners don't have easier lives. They just have stronger outlooks. When you change your outlook, pain becomes training failure, becomes feedback pressure, becomes privilege. You don't drown because of the water around you. You drown because of the water you let get inside you. So today, I need you to make a decision. No more excuses. No more blaming. No more negative thinking. You don't control everything that happens, but you do control how you respond. And that response, that's your outlook. And your outlook will determine your outcome. So if you want a better life, don't just change your actions, change your mindset. Your outlook shapes your reality in ways that most people underestimate, ignore, or completely misunderstand. It's not just a feel-good phrase or something people say to stay positive. It's a fundamental force that quietly influences how you interpret events, how you respond to challenges, and ultimately, what results you produce in your life. The same situation can unfold in front of two individuals, and yet their outcomes will be drastically different, not because of external circumstances, but because of the internal lens through which they view what's happening. Think about how often people label situations as good or bad. That labeling doesn't come from the situation itself. It comes from interpretation, a missed opportunity, a failure, a rejection. These don't carry meaning on their own. The meaning is assigned by the person experiencing them. One person sees rejection as proof that they are not good enough, while another sees it as feedback, as redirection, or as part of a longer process. The event is identical, but the emotional and psychological consequences are completely different because the outlook is different. This is where reality begins to diverge, because your outlook doesn't just affect how you feel in the moment, it affects what you do next. And what you do next, it determines what happens after that. A negative outlook leads to hesitation, doubt, and withdrawal. A positive, a growth-oriented outlook leads to persistence, adaptation, and continued effort. Over time, these small differences in reaction compound into vastly different lives. People often wait for reality to improve before they improve their outlook. They say things like, I'll be positive when things get better, or I'll believe in myself when I see results. But that approach is backwards. The reality you experience is often a reflection of the outlook you carry. If you constantly expect things to go wrong, you prepare less, you take fewer risks, and you interpret neutral events as negative. That expectation shapes your behavior, and your behavior shapes your results, reinforcing the original belief. Your outlook also influences what you notice. The human brain is wired to filter information. At any given moment, there are thousands of details in your environment, but you only consciously register a small portion of them. What you notice depends largely on what you expect and what you believe. If your outlook is pessimistic, you will naturally focus on problems, obstacles, and limitations. If your outlook is optimistic or growth-focused, you will be more likely to notice opportunities, solutions, and possibilities. This selective attention creates a feedback loop. You see what aligns with your outlook, and what you see strengthens your outlook. Over time, this loop becomes so strong that it feels like reality itself is confirming your beliefs, when in fact, you are partially creating that reality through perception and interpretation. Another important aspect is how your outlook affects your resilience. Life is not predictable, fair, or consistently rewarding. There will be setbacks, failures, and unexpected challenges regardless of who you are. The difference lies in how long you stay down and how you interpret those moments. If your outlook frames failure as a permanent condition, you are more likely to give up. If your outlook frames failure as a temporary setback or a learning experience, you are more likely to keep going. Resilience is not just about toughness or endurance. It is deeply connected to perspective. Two people can experience the same level of difficulty, but the one with a stronger, more constructive outlook will recover faster and continue forward with more clarity and determination. Over time, this ability to recover quickly becomes a significant advantage. Your outlook also shapes your relationships. The way you perceive others, interpret their actions, and respond to them is influenced by your internal mindset. If you approach interactions with suspicion, negativity, or insecurity, it will affect how you communicate and how others respond to you. On the other hand, if your outlook is open, constructive, and confident, it creates a different dynamic. People are more likely to trust you, collaborate with you, and respond positively. This doesn't mean that your outlook should ignore reality or pretend that everything is perfect. A strong outlook is not about blind positivity. It's about constructive interpretation. It's about acknowledging challenges without being defined by them. It's about recognizing difficulties while still believing in the possibility of progress. There is also a strong connection between outlook and identity. Over time, the way you interpret your experiences shapes how you see yourself. If you consistently interpret challenges as proof of your inadequacy, you begin to see yourself as incapable. If you interpret challenges as opportunities to grow, you begin to see yourself as someone who can learn, adapt, and improve. This self-perception then influences your future actions. People tend to act in ways that align with their identity. If you believe you are someone who overcomes obstacles, you are more likely to persist when things get hard. If you believe you are someone who fails, you are more likely to stop trying at the first sign of difficulty. In this way, your outlook doesn't just shape your external reality, it shapes your internal sense of who you are. Another layer to consider is how your outlook affects your energy and motivation. When you believe that your efforts matter and that improvement is possible, you are naturally more motivated to take action. When you believe that nothing will change regardless of what you do, your motivation decreases. This is not because of laziness. It's a logical response to your perception of reality. Energy follows belief. If you believe your actions can lead to meaningful outcomes, you invest more effort. If you believe your actions are pointless, you conserve energy and avoid effort. Over time, this difference in energy investment leads to different levels of achievement and growth. It's also important to understand your outlook is not fixed. It is shaped by your experiences, your environment, and your habits of thinking. Just as it can become negative over time, it can also be strengthened and improved. This requires awareness and intentional effort. You have to start noticing how you interpret situations, how you talk to yourself, and what assumptions you make. One practical way to shift your outlook is to question your interpretations. When something negative happens, instead of immediately accepting your first reaction as true, ask yourself if there is another way to view the situation. This doesn't mean forcing a positive spin on everything, but it does mean being open to alternative perspectives that are more constructive and empowering. Another approach is to focus on what is within your control. Many negative outlooks are reinforced by focusing on things that cannot be changed. When you shift your attention to what you can influence, your actions, your effort, your attitude, you regain a sense of agency. This sense of control is a key factor in maintaining a strong and effective outlook. Consistency is also crucial. Changing your outlook is not a one-time decision. It is an ongoing process. Your mind will naturally revert to familiar patterns, especially under stress. That's why it's important to repeatedly reinforce constructive ways of thinking until they become more automatic. Your environment plays a role as well. The people you surround yourself with, the content you consume, and the conversations you engage in all influence your outlook. If you are constantly exposed to negativity, doubt, and limitation, it becomes harder to maintain a strong perspective. On the other hand, being around people and ideas that encourage growth, possibility, and resilience can help strengthen your outlook over time. Ultimately, your outlook acts as a filter, a driver, and a multiplier. It filters how you see the world, it drives how you respond to it, and it multiplies the impact of your actions over time. Even small differences in outlook can lead to large differences in outcomes when they are applied consistently over months and years. What makes this concept powerful is that it puts a significant portion of your experience within your influence. While you cannot control every external event, you have a meaningful degree of control over how you interpret and respond to those events. That control, when used effectively, can change the trajectory of your life. There will always be uncertainty, difficulty, and moments where things don't go as planned. Your outlook does not eliminate these realities, but it determines how you navigate them. It determines whether you see obstacles as barriers or as challenges to overcome. It determines whether you interpret delays as failures or as part of the process. Over time, these interpretations shape your habits, your decisions, and your path. They influence whether you keep moving forward or stop. They influence whether you learn from experience or become discouraged by it. And through that influence, your outlook quietly but powerfully shapes the reality you live in. Perspective has the power to transform the way you experience struggle. And in many cases, it determines whether that struggle weakens you or strengthens you. The events themselves do not carry fixed meaning. Instead, meaning is created through interpretation. When you begin to understand that your perspective is not just a passive reaction, but an active force, you start to see how struggle can become a source of strength rather than a source of defeat. Struggle is unavoidable. It shows up in different forms: failure, rejection, uncertainty, pressure, loss, but no one is exempt from it. The common assumption is that strength comes from avoiding a hardship or minimizing pain, but the reality is the opposite. Strength is often built through engagement with difficulty, not escape from it. However, not everyone who struggles becomes stronger. The key difference lies in how that struggle is perceived and processed. When struggle is viewed as punishment, as something unfair, or as evidence of personal inadequacy, it tends to drain energy. It creates resistance, frustration, and a desire to withdraw. In that state, people are more likely to avoid challenges, give up early, or carry a sense of defeat even when opportunities are still present. The struggle becomes heavy because it feels meaningless or personal in a negative way. On the other hand, when struggle is viewed through a different lens, as a process, a test, or even a necessary stage of growth, it takes on a completely different role. It doesn't necessarily become easier, but it becomes purposeful. That sense of purpose changes how you respond. Instead of asking why something is happening to you in a negative sense, you begin to ask what can be learned from it or how it can be used to improve. This shift in perspective does not eliminate discomfort. Pain, frustration, and difficulty are still present, but the emotional weight changes. When something feels meaningful, it becomes more bearable. When it feels like part of a larger process, it becomes easier to endure and work through. This is why people can go through intense challenges and still come out stronger, because their perspective allowed them to engage with the experience rather than be consumed by it. Perspective also influences the stories you tell yourself about your experiences. These internal narratives shape your identity over time. If every struggle is interpreted as proof that you are not capable, that narrative becomes part of how you see yourself. It limits your willingness to try to take risks and to push beyond your comfort zone. But if struggle is interpreted as part of the journey toward improvement, it contributes to a different narrative. One where you are someone who learns, adapts, and grows. These stories are not just abstract thoughts, they directly affect behavior. Someone who believes that struggle is a sign of failure will try to avoid it, often staying in familiar and safe situations. Someone who believes that struggle is part of growth will be more willing to step into challenging situations, knowing that discomfort is not a sign to stop, but a signal that development is happening. Another important aspect is how perspective shapes your response in the moment of difficulty. When something goes wrong, the initial reaction is often emotional, frustration, disappointment, or even fear. Perspective determines what happens after that initial reaction. Do you stay in that state, or do you shift into problem-solving mode? Do you focus on what went wrong, or do you look for what can be done next? This ability to move from reaction to response is a critical component of turning struggle into strength. It allows you to maintain a sense of control even when circumstances are not ideal. Instead of being overwhelmed by the situation, you begin to engage with it actively. That engagement leads to learning, and learning leads to improvement. Over time, repeated exposure to challenges combined with a constructive perspective builds confidence. Not the kind of confidence that comes from always succeeding, but the kind that comes from knowing you can handle difficulty. This is a deeper, more resilient form of confidence because it is not dependent on perfect outcomes. It is based on experience of facing problems, working through them, and coming out on the other side. Perspective also affects how you measure progress. If you're focused only on outcomes, especially immediate outcomes, struggle can feel like failure. Progress may not always be visible in the short term, especially when you are working on something complex or challenging. But if your perspective includes effort, learning, and improvement as indicators of progress, you begin to see growth even when results are not yet where you want them to be. This broader view of progress helps sustain motivation. It prevents you from becoming discouraged too quickly and allows you to stay committed to the process. Over time, this consistency leads to results that might not have been possible with a more narrow or negative perspective. It is also important to recognize that perspective can influence how long you stay in a struggle. Two people can face the same obstacle, but one may remain stuck for much longer because their perspective limits their options. If you believe there is no solution, you stop looking for one. If you believe improvement is possible, you continue exploring different approaches until you find something that works. This persistence is not just about effort. It is about belief. Perspective shapes that belief. It determines whether you see a challenge as something that can be overcome or something that defines your limits. That belief then drives your actions, which ultimately determine your results. There's also a connection between perspective and adaptability. Challenges often require you to change your approach, learn new skills, or rethink your assumptions. If your perspective is rigid, you may resist these changes, trying to force the same approach even when it's not working. This resistance can prolong struggle and limit growth. A more flexible perspective allows you to adapt. It encourages experimentation, learning, and adjustment. Instead of seeing change as a threat, you begin to see it as part of the process. This adaptability not only helps you overcome current challenges, but also prepares you for future ones. Another dimension to consider is how perspective influences your emotional recovery. Difficult experiences can leave a lasting impact, especially if they are interpreted in a negative way. Holding on to those interpretations can create ongoing stress, self-doubt, or fear. But when you reframe those experiences, you can reduce their emotional weight and extract value from them. This does not mean ignoring or dismissing difficult emotions. It means allowing yourself to feel them while also choosing how you interpret the experience in the long run. By doing so, you prevent past struggles from limiting your future potential. Instead, they become part of your foundation, something you can build on rather than something that holds you back. Perspective is also shaped by comparison. When you compare your struggles to others in an unhelpful way, it can distort your perception. You may feel that your challenges are either too great to overcome or not significant enough to matter. Both extremes can be limiting. A more balanced perspective focuses on your own growth and your own path, rather than constantly measuring against others. Developing a constructive perspective takes time and intentional effort. It requires awareness of your current thought patterns and a willingness to challenge them. It involves practicing new ways of interpreting situations, even when it feels unnatural at first. Over time, these new patterns become more automatic, and your default response to struggle begins to shift. One practical approach is to separate facts from interpretation. When something difficult happens, identify what actually occurred and then examine the meaning you are assigning to it. This helps create space between the event and your reaction, allowing you to choose a more constructive perspective. Another approach is to focus on what can be gained from the experience. This does not mean forcing a positive outcome where none exists, but it does mean looking for elements of growth, learning, or insight. Even small gains can change how you perceive the situation and how you move forward. Your environment also plays a role in shaping your perspective. The people you interact with, the conversations you have, and the content you consume all influence how you think about struggle. Being around individuals who approach challenges with resilience And a growth mindset can reinforce similar patterns in your own thinking. Ultimately, perspective acts as a bridge between experience and outcome. The same struggle can lead to different results depending on how it is interpreted and approached. When perspective is aligned with growth, effort, and learning, struggle becomes a pathway to strength. It becomes something that builds capacity, deepens understanding, and increases resilience. This transformation does not happen instantly. It is the result of repeated choices, choosing to interpret challenges in a constructive way, choosing to continue despite difficulty, and choosing to learn from each experience. Over time, these choices accumulate, and the impact becomes clear. What once felt overwhelming becomes manageable. What once seemed like failure becomes part of a larger process. And what once held you back becomes something that contributes to your strength. Most people who say they are stuck are not actually trapped by their circumstances in the way they believe. What often holds them in place is not a lack of opportunity, intelligence, or resources, but a pattern of thinking that limits what they see as possible. The feeling of being stuck is real, but the cause of it is frequently internal rather than external. It comes from the way situations are interpreted, the assumptions that are made, and the beliefs that are reinforced over time. When someone says, "I'm stuck," it usually reflects a sense of immobility, a belief that no matter what actions taken, nothing will change. This belief can be incredibly powerful because it affects motivation, decision-making, and effort. If you truly believe that your situation cannot improve, you are less likely to try new approaches, less likely to take risks, and more likely to stay within the boundaries of what feels safe and familiar. Over time, this lack of action reinforces the original belief, creating a cycle that feels unbreakable. However, the key issue is not always the situation itself, but the interpretation of the situation. Two people can face similar constraints, limited resources, difficult environments, or repeated setbacks, and yet one finds ways to move forward while the other remains in place. The difference lies in how they think about their circumstances. One sees limitations as permanent barriers, while the other sees them as temporary challenges or problems to be solved. Thinking patterns develop over time. They are shaped by past experiences, environment, and repeated internal dialogue. If someone has experienced failure multiple times, it is easy to begin associating effort with disappointment. This can lead to a mindset where trying feels pointless. Similarly, if someone has been in an environment where opportunities are scarce or where discouragement is common, they may internalize the idea that progress is unlikely or unrealistic. These patterns of thinking become automatic. They operate in the background, influencing how new situations are perceived. When a new opportunity appears, instead of seeing it as a chance for growth, the mind may immediately focus on potential failure or reasons why it will not work. This reaction happens so quickly that it often feels like reality rather than interpretation. One of the most limiting aspects of this kind of thinking is that it narrows perception. When you believe you are stuck, you stop looking for options. You may overlook opportunities that do not fit your expectations or dismiss possibilities before fully exploring them. This creates a kind of mental tunnel vision where only the obstacles are visible and the potential paths forward remain hidden. In addition to narrowing perception, this mindset also affects how challenges are approached. Instead of engaging with problems creatively or persistently, there may be a tendency to avoid them altogether. Avoidance can feel like a form of protection. It prevents immediate discomfort or failure, but it also prevents growth. Over time, avoiding challenges reinforces the belief that they cannot be handled, further strengthening the feeling of being stuck. Another important factor is how people define progress. If progress is seen only in terms of large, immediate changes, it can feel like nothing is improving. This can lead to discouragement, even when small steps are being taken. A more flexible way of thinking recognizes that progress often happens incrementally. Small improvements, when repeated consistently, can lead to significant change over time. The belief that you are stuck is often tied to a fixed view of your abilities. If you see your skills, intelligence, or potential as unchangeable, then any failure becomes a reflection of your limits. This can be discouraging and can lead to a reluctance to try new things. On the other hand, if you view your abilities as something that can be developed, failure becomes part of the learning process rather than a final judgment. This distinction between fixed and flexible thinking is crucial. A fixed mindset leads to avoidance of challenges, fear of failure, and a tendency to give up quickly. A growth-oriented mindset encourages effort, persistence, and a willingness to learn from mistakes. The shift between these two ways of thinking can significantly change how you experience your situation. It's also important to recognize that thinking patterns can create emotional responses that reinforce the feeling of being stuck. Negative thoughts often lead to feelings of frustration, hopelessness, or anxiety. These emotions can make it even harder to take action. When you feel overwhelmed or discouraged, even small tasks can seem difficult. This creates a cycle where thoughts influence emotions, influence behavior, and behavior reinforces the original thoughts. Breaking this cycle requires awareness. You have to start noticing the thoughts that occur when you face challenges or consider taking action. What assumptions are you making? What conclusions are you jumping to? Are you predicting failure before you even begin? By identifying these patterns, you create the opportunity to question them. Questioning your thoughts does not mean ignoring reality or pretending that everything is easy. It means examining whether your interpretation is accurate or helpful. For example, if you think, if this will never work, you can ask yourself what evidence supports that belief and whether there are alternative possibilities. Often these thoughts are based on past experiences rather than current reality. Another important step is to shift focus from what cannot be controlled to what can be influenced. Feeling stuck often comes from focusing on external factors, things that are difficult or impossible to change. While these factors may be real, focusing exclusively on them reduces your sense of agency. By identifying areas where you do have control, even if they are small, you can begin to take action and create momentum. Action is a critical component in changing your situation. Thinking alone is not enough, but thinking influences whether action happens at all. When you start taking small steps, even in uncertain conditions, you begin to gather new information and new experiences. These experiences can challenge your existing beliefs and create a more accurate understanding of what is possible. It is also important to be patient with this process. Changing deeply ingrained thinking patterns takes time. There will be moments where old thoughts resurface, especially it's normal. The goal is not to eliminate negative thoughts entirely, but to reduce their influence and develop the ability to respond to them more effectively, Your environment can either reinforce or challenge your thinking. If you are surrounded by negativity, doubt, or limitation, it can be difficult to maintain a different perspective. On the other hand, being around people who encourage growth, who focus on solutions, and who believe in improvement can help shift your mindset. The ideas you are exposed to regularly play a significant role in shaping how you think. Another aspect to consider is how you interpret effort. If effort is seen as a sign that something is difficult or that you are not naturally good at it, you may avoid putting in the necessary work. But if effort is seen as a normal and essential part of progress, it becomes easier to engage with challenges. This shift in thinking can make a significant difference in how you approach your goals. It is also useful to recognize that being stuck is often temporary, even if it does not feel that way. Situations change, opportunities arise, and new paths become available over time. However, if your thinking remains rigid, you may not be prepared to take advantage of these changes when they occur. By maintaining a more flexible and open mindset, you increase your ability to recognize and act on new possibilities. Your self-talk plays a major role in shaping your thinking. The way you speak to yourself influences how you feel and what you believe. If your internal dialogue is consistently negative or limiting, it reinforces the idea that you are stuck. By becoming more aware of this dialogue and gradually shifting it to be more constructive, you can change how you experience your situation. This does not mean using unrealistic or overly positive statements that do not feel genuine. Instead, it means focusing on balanced and accurate thoughts. For example, instead of saying, "I can't do this," you might say, "This is challenging, but I can improve with effort." This kind of statement acknowledges difficulty while still allowing for growth. Over time, these changes in thinking begin to influence behavior. You may start to take more initiative, explore new options, and persist longer in the face of challenges. These actions lead to new experiences which can further reshape your beliefs. Gradually, the feeling of being stuck begins to diminish, not because the situation has completely changed, but because your relationship to it has changed. It is also important to recognize that progress does not always happen in a straight line. There may be setbacks, periods of slow improvement, or times where it feels like nothing is changing. During these moments, it is easy to revert to old thinking patterns. Maintaining awareness and continuing to challenge those patterns is essential. Your thinking is not just a reflection of your situation. It is a factor that shapes it. By changing how you interpret challenges, how you respond to obstacles, and how you view your own abilities, you begin to create different outcomes. This does not happen instantly, and it does not eliminate all difficulties, but it does create movement. The idea that you are not stuck, but that your thinking is, shifts the focus from external limitations to internal possibilities. It highlights the role you play in your own experience and gives you a point of influence. While you may not control every aspect of your environment, you do have the ability to influence how you think, how you act, and how you respond. This shift is not about ignoring real challenges or pretending that everything is within your control. It is about recognizing that your thinking is a powerful factor in how those challenges are experienced and addressed. By developing more flexible, constructive, and growth-oriented thinking patterns, you create the conditions for change. Over time, as your thinking evolves, your actions begin to change. As your actions change, your results begin to shift. And as your results shift, the belief that you are stuck becomes less convincing. What once felt like a fixed state begins to feel more like a phase. Something that can be moved through rather than something that defines you. Every setback carries a lesson, but that lesson is not always obvious, immediate, or easy to accept. In the moment, setbacks often feel like interruptions, failures, or even confirmations that something has gone wrong. They can trigger frustration, disappointment, and self-doubt. Because of this emotional weight, many people focus only on the surface of the experience, the loss, the mistake, the missed opportunity, without exploring what the situation can actually teach them. A setback, by definition, is something that disrupts progress. It creates a gap between where you expected to be and where you actually are. That gap is uncomfortable. And the natural instinct is to close it as quickly as possible or to avoid thinking about it altogether. However, within that gap lies valuable information. It reveals something about your approach, your preparation, your assumptions, or even your environment. If you are willing to examine it closely, a setback can become a source of insight rather than just a source of frustration. One of the most important lessons setbacks offer is clarity. When things are going well, it's easy to assume that your methods are effective and that your understanding is accurate. Success can sometimes mask weaknesses because it does not force you to question what you are doing. Setbacks, on the other hand, expose flaws. They highlight what is not working, where your knowledge is incomplete, or where your strategy needs adjustment. This clarity is not always comfortable. It can challenge your confidence and force you to confront areas where you need improvement. But without this kind of feedback, growth becomes limited. You can only refine your approach when you know what needs to be changed. And setbacks provide that information in a direct and often unavoidable way. Another lesson embedded in setbacks is the importance of adaptability. When something does not go as planned, it creates an opportunity to reassess and adjust. This process of adjustment is a key part of development. It requires you to step back, evaluate your approach, and consider alternative methods. Over time, this builds flexibility in your thinking and your actions. Adaptability is not just about changing what you do. It is about changing how you think. It involves being open to new ideas, willing to question your assumptions, and able to shift your perspective when necessary. Setbacks encourage this kind of thinking because they disrupt the status quo. They push you out of automatic patterns and require a more deliberate response. Setbacks also teach resilience, experiencing difficulty and continuing forward. Despite it builds a kind of strength that cannot be developed in comfortable conditions. Each time you face a setback and choose to keep going, you reinforce the idea that challenges are not the end of the process. This repetition gradually changes your relationship with difficulty. What once felt overwhelming may begin to feel manageable. Not because the challenges have disappeared, but because your capacity to handle them has increased. This increase in capacity is often subtle. It develops over time through repeated exposure and response. You may not notice it immediately, but it becomes evident in how you react to future challenges. Situations that might have discouraged you before may no longer have the same impact. This is one of the ways setbacks contribute to long-term growth. Another important aspect of setbacks is that they provide an opportunity to refine your goals. Sometimes a setback reveals that your original goal was unclear, unrealistic, or not aligned with your values. This does not mean the goal was wrong, but it may need to be adjusted. The process of refining your goals helps ensure that your efforts are directed in a way that is both effective and meaningful. This refinement can involve changing the timeline, adjusting the scope, or even redefining what success looks like. Without setbacks, these adjustments might never occur, and you could continue pursuing a path that is not optimal. In this way, setbacks act as checkpoints, prompting you to evaluate whether you are moving in the right direction. Setbacks also highlight the role of effort and preparation. When something does not go as planned, it often reveals whether your level of preparation was sufficient or whether your effort was applied in the right areas. This insight can guide future actions, helping you allocate your time and energy more effectively. It is important to note that not all setbacks are the result of mistakes or lack of effort. External factors, timing, and unpredictable events can also play a role. However, even in these cases, there are still lessons to be learned. You may gain a better understanding of your environment, develop contingency plans, or learn how to respond more effectively to uncertainty. One of the challenges in learning from setbacks is managing the emotional response. Emotions like frustration, disappointment, and even embarrassment can make it difficult to think clearly about what happened. These emotions are natural, but if they are not managed, they can prevent reflection. Instead of analyzing the situation, you may focus on the negative feelings associated with it. Creating space between the emotional reaction and the analysis is an important step. This does not mean ignoring your feelings, but rather allowing them to settle before attempting to extract lessons. Once you are in a calmer state, it becomes easier to look at the situation objectively and identify what can be learned. Another barrier to learning from setbacks is the tendency to assign blame. Blame can be directed outward toward other people or circumstances, or inward toward yourself. While it is important to take responsibility for your actions, excessive self-blame can be just as unproductive as avoiding responsibility altogether. Both approaches can prevent you from focusing on constructive solutions. A more effective approach is to focus on understanding rather than blaming. Instead of asking who is at fault, ask what happened, why it happened, and what can be done differently in the future. This shift in focus allows you to move from a reactive mindset to a proactive one. Setbacks also provide an opportunity to develop patience. Progress is rarely linear, and expecting constant forward movement can lead to frustration. Setbacks remind you that growth involves periods of difficulty and that improvement takes time. Developing patience helps you maintain consistency, even when results are not immediate. This patience is closely connected to persistence. When you understand that setbacks are part of the process, it becomes easier to continue despite them. Persistence is not about ignoring setbacks. It is about acknowledging them and choosing to keep moving forward. Each time you do this, you strengthen your ability to stay committed to your goals. Another lesson that setbacks can teach is humility. Success can sometimes create overconfidence, leading you to underestimate challenges or overlook important details. Setbacks can bring your attention back to reality, reminding you that there is always more to learn and that improvement is an ongoing process. This humility is valuable because it keeps you open to feedback and willing to grow. It encourages you to seek out new information, learn from others, and continue developing your skills. Without this openness, progress can stagnate. Setbacks can also deepen your understanding of yourself. They reveal how you respond under pressure, how you handle disappointment, and how you cope with uncertainty. This self-awareness is an important part of personal development. It allows you to identify patterns in your behavior and make more intentional choices in the future. For example, you may notice that you tend to give up quickly when things become difficult, or that you avoid challenges that carry a risk of failure. Recognizing these patterns is the first step toward changing them. Over time, this awareness can lead to more effective strategies and better outcomes that you've achieved. Another important aspect is that setbacks can strengthen your problem-solving skills. When things go wrong, you are forced to think critically, explore alternatives, and find solutions. This process builds mental flexibility and creativity. The more you engage with it, the more confident you become in your ability to handle complex situations. It is also worth noting that the lessons from setbacks are not always immediate. Sometimes the value of an experience becomes clear only in hindsight. What feels like a failure in the moment may later be understood as a turning point or a necessary step in a larger process. This delayed understanding does not reduce the value of the lesson. It simply means that learning can unfold over time. Your willingness to reflect plays a crucial role in this process. Reflection involves looking back on your experiences, analyzing what happened, and considering what you can take from it. Without reflection, setbacks are more likely to be repeated rather than learned from. With reflection, each setback becomes an opportunity to improve. It is also helpful to document your experiences, either mentally or in writing. This can make it easier to identify patterns and track your progress over time. By revisiting past setbacks and the lessons you drew from them, you can reinforce what you have learned and apply it more effectively in the future. Another important point is that setbacks can build empathy. When you experience difficulty, you gain a better understanding of what others may be going through. This can improve your relationships and your ability to support others. It also creates a sense of shared experience, reminding you that struggle is a common part of being human. This broader perspective can reduce feelings of isolation and help you approach challenges with a more balanced mindset. Instead of seeing setbacks as unique to you, you begin to recognize them as part of a larger pattern that many people experience. Ultimately, the value of a setback is not determined by the event itself, but by how you respond to it. If you ignore it, avoid it, or allow it to discourage you completely, the potential lessons are lost. But if you engage with it, reflect on it, and use it to adjust your approach, it becomes a powerful tool for growth. This process requires effort and intention. It is not always easy to look at setbacks in a constructive way, especially when they are recent or emotionally charged. But with practice, it becomes more natural. You begin to see challenges not just as obstacles, but as opportunity to learn and improve. Over time, this shift in perspective changes how you experience setbacks. They may still be difficult, but they are no longer purely negative. They become part of the process, a source of information and a means of development. Each one adds to your understanding, strengthens your abilities, and prepares you for future challenges. In this way, setbacks are not just interruptions to progress. They are integral to it. They provide the feedback, the insight, and the experience needed to move forward more effectively. By recognizing this and engaging with it, you turn what could be limiting into something that contributes to your growth. Winners are often misunderstood because people tend to focus on their outcomes rather than their processes. From the outside, it can look like they have fewer problems, fewer obstacles, or fewer setbacks. It can seem like their path is smoother, more direct, or somehow easier. But when you look closely, that assumption does not hold up. The difference is not that winners face easier circumstances. It is that they respond to those circumstances differently. Life does not selectively remove difficulty for certain people. Challenges, uncertainty, failure, and pressure are part of everyone's experience. What separates one person from another is not the absence of these factors, but the way they are handled. The same obstacle that stops one person becomes a stepping stone for another, not because the obstacle changed, but because the response to it did. Response begins with interpretation. When a challenge appears, the first thing that happens is not action, but perception. Some people immediately see a problem as overwhelming or as evidence that they are not capable. Others see it as something that needs to be worked through. This initial interpretation influences everything that follows. If a situation is perceived as impossible, the likelihood of sustained effort is low. If it is perceived as difficult but manageable, effort becomes more consistent. Winners tend to interpret challenges in a way that keeps them engaged. This does not mean they ignore difficulty or pretend that everything is easy. It means they approach situations with a mindset that allows for action. They recognize obstacles, but they do not define themselves by them. Instead of asking whether something is hard, they focus on what can be done about it. This shift in focus is subtle but powerful. When attention is directed towards solutions rather than problems, it changes how time and energy are used. Instead of dwelling on what went wrong, effort is directed toward what can be improved. This creates forward movement, even in situations where progress is slow or uncertain. Another key difference lies in persistence. When faced with setbacks, many people reduce their effort or stop altogether. This reaction is understandable, especially when the setback feels significant. However, winners tend to maintain their effort even when results are not immediate. They understand that progress often requires sustained action over time, and they are willing to continue despite temporary setbacks. Persistence does not mean repeating the same action without change. It involves adjusting strategies, learning from mistakes, and trying different approaches. Winners are not simply working harder. They are working smarter over time. Each experience provides information, and that information is used to refine their methods. This process of refinement is critical. It allows for continuous improvement rather than stagnation. When something does not work, it is treated as feedback rather than failure. This perspective keeps the process dynamic and adaptable. Instead of being discouraged by what did not work, winners use that information to guide their next steps. Emotional management also plays a significant role in how people respond to challenges. Difficult situations often trigger strong emotions such as frustration, fear, or disappointment. These emotions can interfere with clear thinking and effective action. Winners are not immune to these feelings, but they tend to manage them in a way that allows them to continue functioning. This does not mean suppressing emotions or ignoring them. It means acknowledging them without letting them dictate behavior. By maintaining a level of emotional control, winners are able to stay focused on their goals even when circumstances are not ideal. This ability to regulate emotions contributes to consistency, which is a key factor in long-term success. Another important aspect is accountability. When things go wrong, it is easy to blame external factors. While external factors can certainly influence outcomes, focusing solely on them can limit growth. Winners tend to take responsibility for their actions and their responses, even when circumstances are not entirely within their control. This sense of responsibility creates a greater sense of agency. When you believe that your actions matter, you are more likely to take initiative and make adjustments. This proactive approach leads to more opportunities for improvement. Instead of waiting for conditions to change, winners focus on what they can do within the current situation. Decision-making is also influenced by how challenges are perceived. In uncertain situations, hesitation can be a significant barrier. Fear of making the wrong choice can lead to inaction. Winners, however, tend to make decisions with the understanding that not every choice will be perfect. They accept that mistakes are part of the process and are willing to move forward despite uncertainty. This willingness to act creates momentum. Even imperfect actions can provide valuable feedback and lead to better decisions over time. In contrast, inaction often leads to missed opportunities and reinforces a sense of stagnation. By continuing to make decisions and adjust as needed, winners maintain progress. Another difference lies in how time is viewed. Many people expect quick results and become discouraged when progress is slow. Winners tend to have a longer-term perspective. They understand that meaningful progress often takes time and that consistent effort is required. This perspective helps them remain patient and committed, even when immediate results are not visible. This long-term view also affects how effort is distributed. Instead of focusing only on short bursts of intense activity, winners prioritize consistency. Small, repeated actions accumulate over time, leading to significant results. This approach is more sustainable and less dependent on motivation, which can fluctuate. Learning is another area where responses differ. When faced with challenges, some people focus on avoiding future mistakes by reducing risk. While this can provide short-term safety, it can also limit growth. Winners, on the other hand, focus on learning from their experiences. They analyze what happened, identify areas for improvement, and apply those lessons moving forward. This commitment to learning creates a cycle of continuous development. Each challenge becomes an opportunity to gain knowledge and refine skills. Over time, this leads to increased confidence and confidence. The more you learn, the better equipped you are to handle future challenges. Confidence itself is not a fixed trait, but a result of repeated experiences. Winners build confidence through action. Each time they face a challenge and work through it, their belief in their ability to handle difficulty increases. This confidence grounded in experience rather than assumption, making it more resilient. It is also important to consider how winners view failure. Failure is often seen as something to be avoided at all costs. This fear can prevent people from taking risks or pursuing opportunities. Winners tend to view failure differently. They see it as a temporary outcome rather than a permanent condition. This perspective reduces the fear associated with failure and makes it easier to take action. By reframing failure as part of the process, winners are able to engage more fully with challenges. They are not paralyzed by the possibility of making mistakes because they understand that mistakes are a natural part of learning. This openness allows for greater exploration and innovation. Another factor is discipline. Motivation can be inconsistent, especially in the face of difficulty. Winners rely less on motivation and more on discipline. They develop habits and routines that support their goals, allowing them to continue working even when they do not feel like it. This consistency is a key driver of progress. Discipline also helps maintain focus. In challenging situations, it is easy to become distracted or to shift attention away from what matters. By maintaining clear priorities and sticking to them, winners are able to make steady progress. This focus reduces wasted effort, increases efficiency. Environment and influence play a role as well. The people you interact with and the ideas you are exposed to can shape how you respond to challenges. Winners often surround themselves with individuals who encourage growth, accountability, and resilience. This environment reinforces constructive behaviors and supports continued development. However, even in less supportive environments, the ability to respond differently remains important. While external factors can influence behavior, they do not completely determine it. By developing awareness and intentionality, individuals can choose responses that align with their goals regardless of their surroundings. Another distinction is how winners handle pressure. Pressure can either enhance performance or hinder it, depending on how it is perceived. When pressure is seen as a threat, it can lead to anxiety and reduced effectiveness. When it is seen as an opportunity or a challenge, it can increase focus and effort. Winners tend to interpret pressure in a way that enhances their performance. This does not mean they are always comfortable under pressure, but they have developed the ability to function despite discomfort. This capability is often the result of repeated exposure to challenging situations. Over time, what once felt overwhelming becomes more manageable. Consistency in response is what ultimately creates different outcomes. Anyone can respond well in a single situation, but maintaining that level of response over time is what leads to significant results. Winners develop patterns of behavior that support their goals, and these patterns become more automatic with practice. It is also worth noting that responding differently does not guarantee immediate success. There may still be setbacks, delays, and periods of uncertainty. However, the cumulative effect of constructive responses increases the likelihood of positive outcomes over time. Each decision, each action, and each adjustment contributes to the overall trajectory. The idea that winners respond differently, not easier, shifts the focus from external circumstances to internal processes. It highlights the role of mindset, behavior, and decision-making in shaping outcomes. While you may not control every aspect of your environment, you do have control over how you interpret and respond to it. This understanding creates a sense of empowerment. It suggests that change is possible, not because conditions will suddenly become ideal, but because your approach can evolve. By developing more effective ways of responding to challenges, you can create progress even in difficult situations. Over time, these responses become habits. The way you think, the way you act, and the way you handle challenges become more consistent. This consistency leads to more predictable outcomes, not because life becomes easier, but because you become more capable of navigating it. In this way, the difference between outcomes is not rooted in the absence of difficulty, but in the presence of effective responses. Challenges remain, but the way they are handled changes. And that change, repeated over time, is what separates those who remain in place from those who continue to move forward. Pain is one of the most misunderstood experiences in personal growth. Most people instinctively try to avoid it, minimize it, or escape from it as quickly as possible. That reaction is natural because pain, whether physical or emotional, is uncomfortable and often intense. However, when you look deeper, pain is not just something to be avoided. It is something that carries information, signals change, and often plays a necessary role in development. The idea that pain is temporary while growth is permanent reflects a deeper truth about how transformation actually happens over time. Pain in many forms, is a response to pressure, resistance, or disruption. It shows up when you are pushed beyond your current limits, when expectations are not met, or when something important is at risk. This can happen in learning, in relationships, in work, or in personal challenges. While the immediate reaction is to see pain as purely negative, it often marks the point where change becomes possible. Without that tension, there is little reason to adapt or improve. One of the key characteristics of pain is that it is temporary. Even when it feels overwhelming, it does not last in its original intensity forever. Emotional pain from failure, rejection, or disappointment tends to fade over time, especially as new experiences take its place. Physical pain from exertion or effort also subsides as the body recovers. The temporary nature of pain is important because it means that the discomfort you feel in a moment does not define your entire experience. Growth, on the other hand, tends to be cumulative and lasting. When you learn something new, develop a skill, or strengthen your ability to handle challenges, those changes become part of you. They influence how you think, how you act, and how you respond to future situations. Unlike pain, which fades, growth remains and continues to shape your actions and outcomes. The connection between pain and growth becomes clear when you consider how improvement occurs. Growth often requires you to move beyond what is comfortable or familiar. This movement creates resistance, and that resistance is often experienced as discomfort or pain. For example, learning a new skill can be frustrating because it exposes your current limitations. That frustration is a form of pain, but it is also a sign that you are engaging with something that can lead to improvement. Avoiding this discomfort can limit growth. If you only engage in activities that feel easy or familiar, your development slows down. You remain within your current level of ability because you are not challenging yourself enough to create change. In contrast, when you are willing to experience temporary discomfort, you open the door to new capabilities and understanding. Another important aspect is how pain is interpreted. The same experience can be seen as either something to avoid or something to learn from. This interpretation influences how you respond. If pain is seen as a warning to stop, you may withdraw at the first sign of difficulty. If it is seen as part of the process, you are more likely to continue and work through it. This does not mean that all pain should be ignored or pushed through without consideration. There is a difference between constructive discomfort that leads to growth and harmful situations that should be avoided. The key is to recognize when pain is a signal of development and when is a signal of something that needs to change in a different way. Emotional pain in particular can be a powerful catalyst for growth. Experiences such as failure, rejection, or loss often force you to reflect on your actions, your expectations, and your understanding of yourself. While these experiences can be difficult, they also provide an opportunity to gain insight. They reveal patterns in your behavior, highlight areas where you can improve, and deepen your understanding of what matters to you. This process of reflection is essential for turning pain into growth. Without reflection, painful experiences can simply repeat themselves without leading to improvement. With reflection, they become sources of learning. You begin to see not just what happened, but why it happened and what can be done differently in the future. Another dimension is resilience. Experiencing pain and continuing forward builds the ability to handle future challenges more effectively. Each time you face discomfort and work through it, you expand your capacity. What once felt overwhelming may become manageable, and what once seemed impossible may become achievable. But this increase in capacity is one of the reasons growth is considered permanent. It changes your baseline. You are no longer the same person you were before the experience. You have more knowledge, more experience, and often more confidence in your ability to handle difficulty. These changes remain even after the pain has faded. Pain also plays a role in motivation, can create a sense of urgency or a desire for change. When something is uncomfortable enough, it pushes you to take action. This can lead to new decisions, new habits, and new directions. In this way, pain can act as a starting point for transformation. However, the way you respond to that motivation matters. Pain can lead to either constructive action or avoidance. If it is channeled into learning and improvement, it contributes to growth. If it leads to withdrawal or negative patterns, it can limit progress. The difference lies in how the experience is processed and what actions follow. Time is another important factor. Pain often feels intense in the moment because it is immediate. Growth, however, is gradual. It unfolds over time through repeated actions and experiences. This difference in timing can make it difficult to see the connection between the two. In the short term, pain is more noticeable. In the long term, growth becomes more significant. This is why patience is important. When you are in the middle of a difficult experience, it can be hard to see how it will contribute to your development. The benefits may not be immediately visible, but as time passes and you continue to engage with the process, the results begin to appear. Skills improve, understanding deepens, and confidence grows. Another aspect to consider is how pain can clarify priorities. Difficult experiences often force you to evaluate what is truly important. They can reveal what you are willing to work for and what you need to change. This clarity can guide your decisions and help you focus your efforts more effectively. In addition, pain can strengthen discipline. When you continue to take action despite discomfort, you build the ability to stay consistent. This consistency is a key factor in long-term success. It allows you to continue working toward your goals even when motivation is low or conditions are not ideal. It is also important to recognize that growth is not always comfortable, even after the initial pain has passed. As you continue to develop, you will encounter new challenges and new forms of discomfort. This is part of the process. Growth is not a single event, but an ongoing cycle of effort, adaptation, and improvement. Your mindset plays a significant role in how you experience this cycle. If you expect growth to be easy or free of discomfort, you may become discouraged when challenges arise. If you understand that discomfort is part of the process, you are better prepared to handle it. This expectation helps you stay engaged even when things are difficult. Another factor is how you support yourself during periods of pain. This includes both internal and external support. Internally, it involves maintaining a balanced perspective, managing your thoughts, and staying focused on your goals. Externally, it may involve seeking guidance, learning from others, or surrounding yourself with people who encourage growth. These forms of support can make it easier to navigate difficult experiences. They do not eliminate pain, but they can reduce its impact and help you move through it more effectively. Over time, this creates a more sustainable approach to growth. It is also worth noting that the intensity of pain does not always correlate with the value of the growth that follows. Some experiences may be highly uncomfortable but lead to significant development. Others may be less intense but still contribute to gradual improvement. The key is not the level of discomfort, but how it is used. By consistently engaging with challenges and learning from them, you create a pattern of growth. Each experience adds to your understanding and capability. Over time, this accumulation becomes substantial. The person you become is shaped by these repeated processes of facing discomfort and working through it. Pain, when viewed in isolation, can seem like something to avoid at all costs. But when viewed as part of a larger process, it takes on a different meaning. It becomes a signal that something is happening, that you are being pushed beyond your current limits, and that there's an opportunity to grow. Growth, once achieved, becomes part of your foundation. It influences how you approach future challenges, how you think about yourself, and how you interact with the world. It does not disappear when circumstances change. It remains as a resource that you can draw on repeatedly. The relationship between pain and growth is not always straightforward, and it is not always easy to navigate. But understanding that pain is temporary while growth is lasting can change how you approach difficult experiences. It can shift your focus from avoiding discomfort to engaging with it in a constructive way. Over time, this shift in approach leads to different outcomes. Challenges become less intimidating. Setbacks become more manageable, and progress becomes more consistent. The experiences that once seemed purely negative begin to reveal their value, and the process of growth becomes more intentional. In this way, pain is not just something to endure. It is something that, when approached correctly, contributes to lasting development. You do not control everything that happens in your life, and that reality can feel uncomfortable. External events are often unpredictable, shaped by factors beyond your influence. Other people's decisions, timing, environment, chance, and circumstances that unfold without your permission. Trying to control all of these elements is not only unrealistic, it can also lead to frustration, anxiety, and a constant sense of instability. However, within this lack of control lies something powerful: your response. Your response is the space where your influence began. It is the way you interpret what happened, the way you feel about it, and most importantly, the actions you choose to take afterward. While you cannot dictate every event, you have a significant degree of control over how you react. This distinction is subtle but critical because it shifts your focus from what is uncontrollable to what is actionable. When something unexpected or difficult occurs, the initial reaction is often emotional. You may feel frustration, disappointment, anger, or fear. These reactions are natural and immediate. They are part of being human, and they are not something you can simply eliminate. However, what happens after that initial reaction is where control begins. There is a moment, sometimes very brief, between feeling and action. In that moment, you have the ability to choose how you respond. This choice is not always easy. Emotions can be strong, and they can push you toward impulsive reaction. But with awareness and practice, you can learn to pause, even if only for a second, and consider your options. This pause creates space for a more deliberate response rather than an automatic one. Over time, this ability to pause and choose becomes more natural, and it significantly changes how you experience challenges. Your response influences your outcomes in a direct way. Two people can face the same situation, but their results can differ based on how they respond. If one reacts with avoidance or resignation, progress is limited. If the other responds with problem solving, or persistence, there is a greater chance of improvement. The situation itself may not change, but the direction that follows does. This is why focusing on your response is so important. It is the part of the process where your decisions have the most impact. While you cannot control the starting point of every situation, you can influence the path that follows. Each response you choose sets off a chain of consequences, shaping what happens next. Another important aspect is how your response affects your mindset. When you consistently focus on what you cannot control, it can lead to a sense of helplessness. You may feel like you are at the mercy of external forces with little ability to influence your own life. This perspective can reduce motivation and make it harder to take action. In contrast, when you focus on your response, you reinforce a sense of agency. You recognize that even in difficult situations, there's something you can do. This does not mean you can solve every problem immediately, but it does mean you are not completely powerless. This sense of control, even if it is limited, can significantly improve your ability to cope and to move forward. Your response also shapes your habits over time. The way you react to challenges repeatedly becomes part of your behavior patterns. If you consistently respond with avoidance, that pattern becomes stronger. If you consistently respond with effort and problem solving, that pattern becomes your default. These patterns influence your long-term outcomes because they determine how you handle situations on a regular basis. Developing constructive responses require awareness. You have to notice how you currently react in different situations. Do you tend to withdraw when things get difficult? Do you become overly critical of yourself? Do you focus on what went wrong rather than what can be done next? By identifying these patterns, you create the opportunity to change them. Changing your response does not mean ignoring reality or pretending that everything is fine. It means choosing actions that are aligned with your goals, even when the situation is not ideal. For example, if something goes wrong, a constructive response might involve analyzing what happened, identifying what can be improved, and taking steps to address it. This approach keeps you engaged with the situation rather than disengaging from it. Another important factor is how you interpret events. Your interpretation influences your response. If you see a setback as a failure, you may feel discouraged and stop trying. If you see it as feedback, you are more likely to adjust and continue. The event itself has not changed, but your interpretation of it has, and that changes your response. This connection between interpretation and response highlights the importance of perspective. By developing a more balanced and constructive way of viewing situations, you can influence how you react. This does not mean forcing yourself to be positive at all times, but it does mean being open to different ways of understanding what is happening. Emotional regulation is also a key component. Strong emotions can make it difficult to respond effectively. Learning to manage these emotions through techniques such as pausing, breathing, or stepping back can help you maintain clarity. When your emotions are more stable, your decisions are more likely to be thoughtful and align with your goals. It is also important to recognize that not every response will lead to immediate success. Sometimes, even the best possible response will not produce the desired outcome right away. However, the value of a constructive response lies in its long-term effect. By consistently choosing actions that move you forward, you increase the likelihood of positive outcomes over time. Your response also affects how others perceive and interact with you. In challenging situations, the way you handle yourself can influence relationships, opportunities, and support. A thoughtful and composed response can build trust and respect, while a reactive or negative response can create tension or limit collaboration. This social dimension adds another layer to the impact of your choices. Another aspect to consider is that your response can influence your future mindset. When you handle a situation effectively, even if it is difficult, it builds confidence. You begin to trust your ability to navigate challenges. This confidence makes it easier to face future difficulties with a more stable and proactive approach. On the other hand, if you consistently respond in ways that do not align with your goals, it can reinforce negative beliefs about your abilities. This can create a cycle where you expect poor outcomes and act in ways that contribute to them. Breaking this cycle requires intentional changes in how you respond, even if it feels uncomfortable at first. It is also useful to differentiate between reacting and responding. Reacting is often automatic and driven by emotion. Responding is more deliberate and involves consideration. While you cannot always prevent an initial reaction, you can choose how to follow it. This distinction allows you to take control of your actions even when your emotions are strong. Developing this skill takes practice, involves repeatedly choosing to pause, reflect, and act intentionally. At first, it may require conscious effort, but over time it becomes more natural. As it becomes part of your routine, your overall approach to challenges begins to shift. Another important point is that focusing on your response does not mean accepting unfavorable situations without change. It means engaging with those situations in a way that maximizes your ability to influence them. Sometimes the appropriate response involves taking action to change your circumstances. Other times it involves adapting to conditions that cannot be altered immediately. In both cases, the focus remains on what you can do rather than what you cannot. This focus helps maintain momentum. Even small actions can create progress, and progress can build over time. By staying engaged, you avoid the stagnation that often comes from feeling powerless. Your response also interacts with your goals. When you have clear goals, it becomes easier to choose responses that align with them. In difficult situations, you can ask yourself what action moves you closer to your objective. This clarity can guide your decisions and help you stay focused, even when distractions or challenges arise. Consistency is crucial in this process. One constructive response can make a difference, but repeated responses create lasting change. Over time, these consistent actions shape your path. They influence the opportunities you create, the skills you develop, and the results you achieve. It is also important to be patient with yourself. Changing how you respond to situations is not an instant process. There will be moments where you fall back into old patterns. This is normal. The goal is not perfection, but progress. Each time you make a more intentional choice, you reinforce a new pattern. Your environment can support or challenge this process. Being around people who respond to challenges constructively can influence your own behavior. Observing how others handle difficult situations can provide examples and ideas for your own responses. At the same time, it is important to maintain awareness of your own choices, regardless of external influences. Ultimately, the idea that you control your response, not your circumstances, shifts your perspective in a meaningful way. It does not deny the reality of external challenges, but it emphasizes your role in navigating them. It highlights the part of the process where your decisions matter most. By focusing on your response, you take an active role in shaping your experience. You move from being a passive participant to an engaged participant. This shift creates opportunities for growth, improvement, and progress, even in situations that are not ideal. Over time, as you continue to practice this approach, it becomes a defining part of how you operate. Challenges still arise, and circumstances remain unpredictable, but your ability to respond effectively becomes more consistent. This consistency influences your outcomes, your mindset, and your overall direction. In this way, while you may not control everything that happened, you maintain control over something equally important, the way you choose to move forward. Negative thinking has a subtle but powerful way of shaping outcomes, often without people fully realizing the extent of its influence. It is not just a matter of mood or attitude. It directly affects perception, decision-making, behavior, and ultimately results. When negative thinking becomes a consistent pattern, it creates limitations that can prevent progress, even in situations where opportunities exist. At its core, negative thinking is a pattern of interpreting situations in a way that emphasizes problems, risks, and unfavorable outcomes. It often involves expecting the worst, doubting one's abilities, or focusing on what could go wrong rather than what could go right. While some level of caution is useful, persistent negativity can distort reality and create barriers that are not necessarily grounded in actual constraints. One of the primary ways negative thinking limits outcomes is through perception. The way you think influences what you notice. When your mindset is dominated by negativity, your attention is naturally drawn to obstacles, flaws, and potential failure. This selective focus can cause you to overlook opportunity, resources, or solutions that are present but do not align with your expectation. This filtering effect creates a skewed version of reality. It is not that positive elements do not exist, but they are less likely to be recognized. They are less likely to be recognized. Over time, this reinforces a belief that circumstances are worse than they actually are. This belief then shapes how you approach situations, often leading to more cautious or avoidant behavior. Another significant impact of negative thinking is on decision-making. When you expect unfavorable outcomes, you are more likely to make decisions based on fear rather than possibility. This can lead to hesitation, overanalysis, or complete inaction. Opportunities that require risk or initiative may be avoided because the potential downsides are given more weight than the potential benefits. This cautious approach can reduce the likelihood of failure in the short term, but it also limits growth and progress. Many meaningful opportunities involve some degree of uncertainty. By consistently avoiding these situations, you reduce your chance of achieving positive outcomes. In this way, negative thinking creates a self-imposed boundary around what you are willing to attempt. Negative thinking also affects effort. When you believe that your actions are unlikely to succeed, your motivation decreases. This is a logical response. So if the expected outcome is negative, there is little incentive to invest time and energy. However, this reduced effort often contributes to the very outcomes you fear. When you do not fully engage, your chances of success decrease, reinforcing the original belief. This creates a feedback loop. Negative thinking leads to reduced effort. Reduced effort leads to poor results. And those results reinforce negative thinking. Over time, this cycle becomes more entrenched, making it increasingly difficult to break. Another way negative thinking limits outcomes is through its impact on confidence. Confidence is not just about feeling good. It influences how you act. When you doubt your abilities, you are less likely to take initiative, speak up, or pursue challenging goals. This can limit your exposure to experiences that would otherwise contribute to growth. Confidence is built through action and experience. When negative thinking prevents you from engaging in these experiences, it also prevents you from developing confidence. This creates a situation where lack of confidence leads to less action, and less action leads to continued lack of confidence. Negative thinking also influences how you respond to setbacks. When something goes wrong, a negative mindset is more likely to interpret it as confirmation of failure or inadequacy. This can lead to discouragement and a desire to stop trying. Instead of viewing setbacks as temporary or as opportunities to learn, they are seen as evidence that further effort is pointless. This interpretation can significantly limit resilience. If every setback is seen as a final outcome rather than part of a process, it becomes difficult to continue. Persistence decreases and progress slows or stops altogether. In contrast, a more balanced mindset allows for setbacks to be integrated into the learning process, maintaining momentum even in difficult situations. Another important factor is how negative thinking affects emotional state. Persistent negative thoughts can lead to feelings of stress, anxiety, or frustration. These emotions can interfere with concentration, creativity, and problem solving. When your mental state is dominated by worry or doubt, it becomes harder to think clearly and make effective decisions. This emotional impact also affects energy levels. Negative thinking can be mentally exhausting, reducing the energy available for productive activities. When energy is low, it becomes more difficult to take action, further limiting outcome. This creates another cycle where negative thoughts lead to reduced energy, which leads to less action, reinforcing the negative mindset. Social interactions are also influenced by thinking patterns. When you approach interactions with negativity or self-doubt, it can affect how you communicate and how others respond to you. You may be less likely to express ideas, collaborate, or engage with others. This can limit opportunities for support, learning, and advancement. In addition, negative thinking can lead to misinterpretation of others' actions. Neutral or ambiguous situations may be perceived as negative, creating unnecessary tension or conflict. This can strain relationships and reduce the likelihood of positive interactions, further limiting opportunities. Another dimension is how negative thinking affects goal setting. When you expect limited outcomes, you may set lower goals or avoid setting goals altogether. This reduces the direction and focus needed for progress. Without clear goals, effort becomes less structured and results become less predictable. Even when goals are set, negative thinking can influence how they are pursued. You may approach them with doubt, expecting failure rather than success. This expectation can affect the strategies you use and the persistence you show. Over time, this can lead to outcomes that align with your initial expectations, reinforcing the belief that success is unlikely. Negative thinking also impacts creativity and problem solving. When your focus is on what cannot be done, it limits your ability to explore alternatives. Creativity requires openness and flexibility, but negativity often narrows thinking. This can make it difficult to find solutions even when they exist. By contrast, a more constructive mindset encourages exploration. It allows you to consider different approaches and to experiment with new ideas. This increases the likelihood of finding effective solutions and improving outcomes. It is important to note that negative thinking is not always obvious. It can appear in subtle forms, such as self-doubt, overgeneralization, or focusing on past failures. These patterns can operate in the background, influencing behavior without being consciously recognized. Becoming aware of these patterns is the first step in addressing them. By identifying negative thoughts as they occur, you create an opportunity to question them. Are they accurate? Are they helpful? Are there alternative ways to view the situation? This process of questioning can reduce the influence of negative thinking over time. Replacing negative thinking does not mean adopting unrealistic positivity. It involves developing a more balanced perspective. This includes acknowledging challenges while also recognizing possibilities. It means being realistic about difficulties without assuming that negative outcomes are inevitable. Another important approach is focusing on evidence. Negative thoughts often rely on assumptions rather than facts. By examining the actual evidence, you can create a more accurate understanding of the situation. This can reduce the intensity of negative thinking and support more effective decision-making. Taking action is also a key component. Even small steps can challenge negative beliefs. When you act despite doubt and achieve even minor progress, it provides evidence that your assumptions may not be entirely accurate. Over time, these experiences can shift your mindset. Your environment plays a role as well. Exposure to supportive and constructive influences can help counteract negative thinking. This includes interactions with people who encourage growth, as well as engaging with ideas and content that promote a balanced perspective. Consistency is essential in this process. Negative thinking patterns often develop over a long period, and changing them requires repeated effort. By consistently challenging negative thoughts and choosing more constructive responses, you gradually weaken the old patterns and strengthen new ones. It is also helpful to recognize that negative thinking does not define you. It is a pattern, not a fixed trait. This distinction is important because it means change is possible. By viewing it as something that can be modified, you create the opportunity to take control of your mindset. Wow. Over time, as negative thinking decreases, its limiting effects also diminish. Perception becomes more balanced, decision-making becomes more proactive, and effort becomes more consistent. These changes lead to improved outcomes, not because circumstances have necessarily changed, but because your approach to them has. The relationship between thinking and outcomes is not always immediate, but it is cumulative. Small differences in perception, decision-making, and behavior can add up over time, leading to significant differences in results. By addressing negative thinking, you remove barriers that may have been limiting your progress. This process requires awareness, effort, and patience. There will be moments where negative thoughts reappear, especially under stress. This is normal. The goal is not to eliminate them completely, but to reduce their influence and to respond to them more effectively. As you continue to develop a more balanced mindset, you create more space for possibility. You become more willing to take action, more open to opportunities, and more resilient in the face of challenges. These changes expand what is achievable, allowing for outcomes that may have previously seemed out of reach. Growth begins at the point where excuses end, but that point is not always obvious. Excuses rarely present themselves clearly as avoidance. They often appear reasonable, justified, and even logical. They are explanations for why something cannot be done, why progress has not been made, or why effort has not been applied. In many cases, they are rooted in real challenges, limited time, lack of resources, difficult circumstances. However, the role excuses play is not just to describe reality, but to define your response to it. An excuse shifts focus away from action. It places attention on external factors or perceived limitations rather than on what can be done within those conditions. This shift reduces the sense of responsibility and in doing so, reduces the likelihood of taking initiative. Why? While it may provide temporary comfort by explaining a lack of progress, It also prevents the kind of engagement that leads to improvement. One of the reasons excuses are so effective is that they often contain some truth. It may be true that a situation is difficult, that resources are limited, or that circumstances are not ideal. The problem is not acknowledging these realities. The problem is allowing them to become final conclusions. When an explanation becomes a stopping point rather than a starting point, it limits what follows. Growth allows movement, taking action, making adjustments, learning from experience. Excuses interrupt this process. They create a mental barrier that makes inaction feel justified. Instead of asking what can be done, the focus shifts to why something cannot be done. Over time, this pattern can become habitual, influencing how challenges are approached across different areas of life. Another important aspect of excuses is how they affect accountability. When responsibility is consistently directed outward, it becomes difficult to recognize the areas where change is possible. This does not mean that external factors are irrelevant, but it does mean that focusing exclusively on them reduces your ability to influence outcomes. Accountability, in contrast, brings attention back to your own actions and decisions. Taking responsibility is not about assigning blame to yourself. It is about recognizing where you have control. It involves asking what you can do differently, what you can improve, and how you can respond more effectively. This perspective creates a sense of agency, which is essential for growth. Without it, progress becomes dependent on external changes rather than internal effort. Excuses also influence how effort is applied. When a task is framed as impossible or not worth attempting, effort is reduced or avoided entirely. This prevents the kind of engagement that leads to learning and development. Even when success is uncertain, effort provides information. It reveals what works, what does not, and what needs to be adjusted. Without this information, improvement is limited. Another dimension to consider is how excuses shape identity. Repeatedly justifying an action can lead to a self-perception that reinforces those patterns. You may begin to see yourself as someone who is constrained by circumstances, someone who cannot move forward because of external limitations. This identity then influences future behavior, making it more likely that excuses will continue to be used. In contrast, when excuses are reduced and action is taken, even in small ways, a different identity begins to form. You start to see yourself as someone who engages with challenges, who takes initiative, and who looks for solutions. This shift in self-perception supports continued growth because it aligns with behaviors that lead to improvement. It is also important to recognize that excuses can be subtle. They do not always appear as clear statements like "I can't." They can take the form of delay, distraction, or prioritizing less important tasks. Procrastination, for example, is often a form of excuse. It allows you to avoid discomfort while maintaining the appearance of being busy. However, this avoidance prevents progress on the tasks that matter most. Breaking this pattern requires awareness. You need to notice when you are avoiding action and examine the reasons behind it. Are those reasons truly limiting, or are they serving as a way to avoid discomfort or uncertainty? This kind of questioning can help you identify excuses and begin to challenge them. Another factor is fear. Many excuses are rooted in fear. Fear of failure, fear of judgment, fear of uncertainty. These fears can make action feel risky or uncomfortable. Excuses provide a way to avoid facing these fears directly. By attributing an action to external factors, you can avoid confronting the possibility of failure or the discomfort of trying. Addressing this requires a willingness to engage with fear rather than avoid it. This does not mean eliminating fear entirely, but it does mean recognizing it and choosing to act despite it. When you take action in the presence of fear, you begin to reduce its influence. Over time, this makes it easier to continue moving forward. Excuses also affect how challenges are interpreted. When a situation is seen primarily through the lens of limitation, it becomes harder to identify opportunities or alternative approaches. This narrow perspective can prevent creative problem solving and limit the range of possible actions. By shifting focus to what can be done, even in small ways, you open up new possibilities. Another important aspect is consistency. Growth is not the result of a single action, but of repeated effort over time. Excuses disrupt this consistency. Each time you justify inaction, you create a gap in the process. These gaps can accumulate, slowing progress and making it harder to build momentum. Momentum is a key factor in growth. When you take action consistently, even if the steps are small, you create a sense of progress. This progress reinforces motivation and makes it easier to continue. Excuses, on the other hand, interrupt this flow. They create breaks in effort that can make it harder to restart. It is also useful to consider the role of standards. The expectations you set for yourself influence how you respond to challenges. If your standards allow for frequent excuses, it becomes easier to justify inaction. If your standards emphasize responsibility and effort, you are more likely to take action, even when conditions are not ideal. Raising your standards does not mean expecting perfection. It means expecting effort and engagement. It means recognizing that while you may not control every outcome, you do control whether you try, whether you learn, and whether you continue. Another important point is that eliminating excuses does not require perfect conditions. Waiting for the right moment, the right resources, or the right level of confidence can become an excuse in itself. Growth often begins in imperfect situations. By starting where you are with what you have, you begin the process of change. This approach also builds resourcefulness. When you do not rely on ideal conditions, you learn to work within constraints. This can lead to creative solutions and a deeper understanding of your capabilities. Over time, this adaptability becomes a strength that supports continued growth. It's also important to recognize that progress may be slow, especially at the beginning. When excuses are removed, the focus shifts to action, but results may not appear immediately. This can be discouraging if you expect quick outcomes. Maintaining patience and continuing to take action is essential during this phase. Reflection plays a role as well. As you take action, it is important to evaluate what is working and what is not. This allows you to adjust your approach and improve over time. Without reflection, you may repeat ineffective strategies, which can lead to frustration and the return of excuses. Another factor is how you handle setbacks. Even when you eliminate excuses, challenges and failures will still occur. The way you respond to these setbacks determines whether you continue to grow or revert to old patterns. By viewing setbacks as part of the process rather than as reasons to stop, you maintain momentum. Your environment can also influence the presence of excuses. Being around people who frequently justify inaction can reinforce similar behavior. Conversely, being around individuals who take responsibility and act consistently can encourage you to do the same. While you cannot always control your environment, being aware of its influence can help you make more intentional choices. It is also helpful to create structures that reduce the opportunity for excuses. This can include setting clear goals, establishing routines, and creating accountability. When expectations are defined and tracked, it becomes harder to justify inaction. These structures support consistency and make it easier to stay on track. Another important aspect is self-talk. The way you speak to yourself influences your behavior. If your internal dialogue is filled with justifications and reasons to avoid action, it reinforces excuses. By shifting your self-talk to focus on what can be done, you create a more constructive mindset. This does not mean ignoring challenges or pretending they do not exist. It means acknowledging them while still choosing to act. For example, instead of saying, "I don't have enough time," you might say, "What can I do with the time I had?" This shift in language reflects a shift in perspective. Over time, as excuses decrease and action increases, results begin to change. Progress may be gradual, but it becomes more consistent. Each action contributes to development, building skills, confidence, and understanding. These gains reinforce the value of taking responsibility and continuing forward. The process is not always easy. There will be moments where excuses seem appealing, especially when tasks are difficult or outcomes are uncertain. Recognizing these moments and choosing to act anyway is a key part of growth. Each time you do this, you strengthen your ability to move forward. Ultimately, growth begins when excuses lose their influence. This does not mean that challenges disappear, but it does mean that your response to them changes. Instead of being a stopping point, Difficulties become something you engage with. This engagement creates movement, and that movement leads to development. By focusing on action rather than justification, you take control of your progress. You shift from explaining why something has not happened to actively working toward making it happen. Over time, this shift transforms not only your results, but also your mindset and your approach to challenges. And as this process continues, growth becomes less dependent on external conditions and more dependent on your willingness to act, adapt, and persist. The journey of taking full responsibility for your life is one of the most transformative steps you can make as a person. Yet it is also one of the most challenging. Responsibility is not merely about acknowledging what you have control over. It is about recognizing that your actions, decisions, and mindset ultimately shape your results. It is easy to blame external circumstances, other people's situations, timing, or luck, but doing so keeps you stuck, limits growth, and prevents you from realizing your potential. True ownership begins with the understanding that your life's outcomes are the direct result of your responses to what happens, not the events themselves. Taking full responsibility means refusing to allow external forces to dictate the trajectory of your life. It requires a shift from a reactive mindset, where you let circumstances control your emotions and actions, to a proactive mindset, where you deliberately choose how to respond regardless of what occurs around you. This mindset shift is foundational because it moves you from a place of powerlessness to one of agency. It recognizes that while you cannot control everything, you can control your effort, your attitude, and your decision. These elements cumulatively have a far greater impact on your life than the uncontrollable variables that exist outside your influence. The first challenge in embracing responsibility is the natural human tendency to make excuses. Excuses are convenient. They provide temporary comfort by explaining away failure, frustration, or lack of progress. They often appear rational and justified, citing external factors like limited resources, time constraints of others, actions of others. However, while excuses may reduce immediate discomfort, they also strip away your power to change the outcome. When you justify inaction or limited effort, you inadvertently create barriers that prevent growth. Each excuse delays progress, and over time, excuses compound, forming a pattern of avoidance that is difficult to break. Acknowledging responsibility also requires a brutal level of honesty with yourself. This is often uncomfortable because it forces you to confront areas where your choices may have contributed to negative results. It requires examining your habits, your effort levels, your mindset, and your reactions to challenges. No one enjoys admitting their shortcomings or recognizing where they fell short, but this reflection is essential for meaningful change. Without it, growth remains superficial, and the cycle of blaming external factors continues. Taking responsibility does not imply that you are at fault for everything that happens to you. Life is complex, and many circumstances are beyond individual control. However, responsibility is about focusing on the aspects you can influence. Your actions, your decisions, and your mindset. By taking control of these areas, you empower yourself to affect outcomes even in less than ideal situations. This perspective shifts the focus from lamenting what cannot be changed to acting on what can be controlled. Another essential aspect of responsibility is owning your decision. Every choice you make has consequences, both immediate and long-term. Many people underestimate the impact of small daily decisions, but over time, these accumulate and define the direction of your life. Choosing to take action when it is difficult, to persist when it feels uncomfortable, and to push past fear all compounds into progress and success. Conversely, choosing avoidance, hesitation, or inaction compounds into stagnation and regret. Responsibility means fully understanding that the life you are living is, in large part, the sum of your choices. An important consequence of embracing responsibility is empowerment. While it may initially feel overwhelming to recognize the extent to which your actions determine your outcomes, this awareness ultimately liberates you. If you have the power to influence your results, you also have the power to change them. You are no longer waiting for someone else to act, for conditions to become perfect, or for luck to favor you. Every action you take, no matter how small, becomes meaningful because it contributes to shaping your reality. A key component of responsibility is consistency. One cannot simply take ownership of their life in moments of inspiration or during periods of high motivation. True responsibility manifests in the daily choices and habits that define how you respond to challenges, setbacks, and opportunities. Consistency builds credibility, skill, and momentum. Each day you commit to acting responsibly reinforces your ability to influence your outcomes, creating a compounding effect that becomes increasingly powerful over time. Resilience is closely linked to responsibility. Life is unpredictable and setbacks are inevitable. When you take full responsibility, setbacks are no longer reasons to complain or blame. They are opportunities to learn, adjust, and improve. Responsible individuals view obstacles as feedback rather than punishment. They analyze what went wrong, identify actionable adjustments, implement changes. By doing so, they turn adversity into growth and prevent temporary setbacks from derailing long-term progress. Responsibility also shapes how you perceive failure. Many people avoid risk because they fear failure, blaming external circumstances if things go wrong. Taking responsibility reframes failure as part of the process of growth. It emphasizes that even when results are not as desired, there's always something to be learned, improved, and applied moving forward. This mindset transforms challenges from threats into tools for development, allowing for continual progress despite obstacles. Furthermore, taking full responsibility requires discipline. Motivation alone is insufficient because motivation fluctuates. Responsibility anchors action in principle rather than mood. It means showing up and doing what needs to be done, even when energy is low, conditions are imperfect, or outcomes are uncertain. This discipline allows you to maintain effort when external circumstances are not supportive, further solidifying your ability to influence your life positively. Another critical dimension is self-reflection. Responsible individuals continuously evaluate their performance, habits, and outcomes. They ask difficult questions. What could I have done differently? Where did I succeed? And where did I fall short? This level of introspection ensures that growth is intentional and ongoing. Without reflection, even responsible actions may be misdirected, limiting their effectiveness over time. Accountability is a natural extension of responsibility. Being accountable means acknowledging the results of your choices and actions without deflection or blame. It requires honesty with yourself, and in many cases with others. Accountability fosters trust, reliability, and credibility because it demonstrates integrity. Those who take full responsibility are seen as dependable and capable, which often leads to greater opportunities and influence. Taking responsibility also requires embracing discomfort. Growth rarely happens in comfort zones. Challenges, pressure, and difficult decisions are inherent in life, and responsible individuals do not shy away from these moments. They understand that avoiding discomfort may provide short-term relief, but prevents long-term progress. By facing challenges head-on and making deliberate choices in difficult situations, they cultivate strength, skill, and resilience. Perspective is another element tied to responsibility. Responsible individuals recognize that external circumstances may not be ideal, but how they respond determines their trajectory. They focus on solutions, opportunities, and proactive measures, rather than dwelling on obstacles, injustices, or unfairness. This perspective enables them to maintain clarity and direction, even when conditions are challenging. Ownership also transforms relationships and interactions. When you take responsibility for your actions, you naturally become more reliable, empathetic, and constructive in dealings with others. It reduces blame shifting and conflict because interactions are based on accountability rather than defensiveness. People who take responsibility foster respect, collaboration, and influence, which opens doors both personally and professionally. An essential aspect of responsibility is self-mastery. Recognizing that your reactions, emotions, and decisions are within your control allows for greater influence over life circumstances. It emphasizes personal agency, reduces the tendency to be reactive, and strengthens the ability to respond thoughtfully rather than impulsively. By mastering yourself, you gain mastery over the aspects of life that matter most. Furthermore, embracing responsibility strengthens confidence. Knowing that you are capable of shaping your outcomes fosters belief in your own abilities. This confidence is not inflated or unrealistic. It is grounded in repeated practice of intentional decision-making, consistent effort, and learning from experience. Confidence grows because actions are aligned with results, reinforcing the sense of control and capability. Responsibility also interacts with vision and goal setting. When you take full ownership of your life, you naturally begin to define what success looks like on your terms. Goals become actionable because you understand achieving them depends primarily on your effort, planning, and persistence. This mindset eliminates reliance on luck, others' actions, or external validation as prerequisites for progress. Growth accelerates when responsibility is embraced because it creates a feedback loop. Actions lead to outcome. Outcomes inform reflection, guides better decision, and improved decisions drive further outcomes. Each cycle compounds, producing momentum and reinforcing the power of choice. Those who shirk responsibility remain outside this loop, leaving outcomes largely dictated by circumstance. It is important to acknowledge that taking full responsibility is not always easy. It requires humility to admit mistakes, courage to face consequences, patience to persist through setbacks, and tenacity to maintain effort when results are delayed. Yet these very challenges provide the opportunity for profound personal development as each hurdle strengthens character, resilience, and capability. Ultimately, taking full responsibility means committing to the understanding that your life is the result of your actions, not merely your circumstances. It is the conscious decision to engage fully with your choices, to confront challenges directly, and to persist despite uncertainty or difficulty. This commitment is the foundation for meaningful growth, sustained success, and personal empowerment. When responsibility is fully embraced, excuses lose their power, setbacks become lessons, fear becomes manageable, and potential becomes attainable. You no longer wait for permission, for luck, or for ideal conditions. Every day, every decision, and every action becomes an opportunity to shape your life. Responsibility transforms existence from a passive experience into an active pursuit, where your results reflect your effort, your discipline, and your deliberate choices. This level of ownership does not guarantee life without challenges, but it guarantees that you will approach those challenges from a position of strength, clarity, and agency. It turns obstacles into opportunity, problems into lessons, and limitations into areas of mastery. In embracing responsibility, you step fully into your power, recognizing that your life's trajectory is determined not by what happens to you, but by how you choose to respond, act, and persist in the face of whatever comes your way. A powerful mindset creates powerful results, but behind that truth lies another layer that many people overlook. Consistency of thought determines conceived outcome. What you repeatedly think about, focus on, and reinforce internally does not stay contained within your mind. It translates into behavior, shapes your habits, influences your decision, and ultimately determines the trajectory of your life. A single positive thought may inspire you momentarily, but it is the repeated pattern of thinking that builds a foundation strong enough to produce lasting results. Every action begins as a thought. Before you move, before you speak, before you decide, there is a moment, sometimes brief, sometimes extended, where your mind interprets a situation, forms a response. If that interpretation is rooted in clarity, belief, and intention, the action that follows is more likely to be purposeful and effective. If it is rooted in doubt, fear, or negativity, the action becomes hesitant, inconsistent, or absent altogether. The challenge is that most people do not consciously manage their thinking patterns. Thoughts are often treated as automatic, something that simply happens rather than something that can be directed. Over time, these automatic thoughts form habits. Just as physical habits are built through repetition, mental habits are formed through repeated patterns of thinking. If those patterns are negative or limiting, they become the default response to challenges and opportunity alike. Consistency of thought does not mean forcing yourself to think positively at all times or ignoring difficulties. It means developing a stable, intentional way of interpreting situations. It means choosing perspectives that support growth, action, and resilience, even when circumstances are not ideal. This kind of consistency creates a mental environment where productive action becomes more natural and sustainable. One of the key ways consistent thinking influences results is through decision making. Decisions are rarely isolated events. They are influenced by underlying beliefs and assumptions. If you consistently think in terms of possibility, growth, and capability, your decisions will reflect those beliefs. You will be more likely to take calculated risks, pursue opportunities, and commit to long-term goals. If your thinking is inconsistent or dominated by doubt, your decisions will reflect hesitation, avoidance, or short-term thinking. Over time, these decisions accumulate. Each choice may seem small on its own, but together they create a pattern that defines your progress. Consistent thinking ensures that these decisions are aligned with your goals rather than being influenced by temporary emotions or external pressures. This alignment is what allows for steady, meaningful advancement. Another important factor is how consistent thinking affects effort. When your mindset is stable and focused, it becomes easier to maintain effort over time. You are not constantly debating whether to act or questioning your direction. Instead, your thinking supports your actions, creating a sense of clarity and purpose. This reduces internal resistance and allows you to focus more energy on execution. Inconsistent thinking, on the other hand, creates friction. One day you may feel motivated and confident, while the next you may feel doubtful and uncertain. This fluctuation disrupts momentum and makes it difficult to sustain progress. Effort becomes sporadic and results become unpredictable. By stabilizing your thinking, you reduce this variability and create a more reliable path forward. Consistency of thought also plays a critical role in handling challenges. Difficulties are inevitable, and how you respond to them determine whether they become obstacles or opportunities. A consistent mindset provides a framework for interpretation. Instead of reacting impulsively or emotionally, you approach challenges with a steady perspective that emphasizes learning and adaptation. This does not eliminate frustration or discomfort, but it prevents those emotions from dictating your actions. You remain grounded in your approach, allowing you to respond constructively rather than reactively. Over time, this builds resilience, making it easier to navigate future challenges with confidence and composure. Another dimension is how consistent thinking shapes identity. The way you think about yourself influences how you act. If your internal dialogue consistently reinforces capability, growth, and responsibility, you begin to see yourself as someone who embodies those qualities. This self-perception then guides your behavior, creating a cycle where your actions reinforce your identity. In contrast, inconsistent or negative thinking can create conflicting identities. You may see yourself as capable in one moment and incapable in another, leading to inconsistent behavior. This lack of alignment makes it difficult to build confidence and maintain progress. By establishing consistent thought patterns, you create a stable sense of self that supports your goals. Consistency of thought also affects how you use time. When your mindset is aligned with your objectives, you are more likely to prioritize activities that contribute to your goals. You become more intentional with your time, focusing on actions that produce value rather than those that provide temporary distraction or comfort. This intentionality increases productivity and accelerates progress. Without consistent thinking, time can be easily misallocated. Decisions about how to spend time become influenced by mood, convenience, or external factors rather than by purpose. This leads to inefficiency and reduces the overall impact of your efforts. Over time, these small inefficiencies accumulate, limiting your results. But another important aspect is emotional regulation. Consistent thinking provides a stable foundation for managing emotions. When your mindset is clear and intentional, you are better equipped to handle stress, frustration, and uncertainty. You are less likely to be overwhelmed by temporary setbacks because your thinking remains grounded in a broader perspective. Emotional stability is essential for sustained performance. When emotions fluctuate significantly, they can disrupt focus, decision-making, and effort. By maintaining consistent thinking, you create a buffer that helps regulate these fluctuations, allowing you to remain effective even in challenging situations. It is also important to consider how consistent thinking influences learning. Growth requires the ability to absorb information, reflect on experiences, and apply new insights. A consistent mindset supports this process by providing a framework for interpretation. You are more likely to view experiences as opportunities to learn rather than fixed outcomes. This perspective encourages curiosity and adaptability. Instead of being discouraged by mistakes, you analyze them, extract lessons, and adjust your approach. Over time, this leads to continuous improvement and a deeper understanding of your capabilities. Developing consistent thinking requires deliberate effort. It begins with awareness, recognizing your current thought pattern and identifying areas where they may be inconsistent or limiting. This awareness allows you to intervene, to question automatic thoughts, and to choose more constructive perspective. Repetition is key in this process. Just as negative patterns are built through repetition, positive and productive patterns are established in the same way. By consistently reinforcing constructive thoughts, you gradually replace old patterns with new ones. This does not happen instantly, but with persistence, it becomes more natural. Environment also plays a role. The inputs you expose yourself to, conversations, media, information, can influence your thinking. Surrounding yourself with constructive influences can support the development of consistent thought patterns. This does not mean avoiding all negativity, but it does mean being intentional about what you allow to shape your mindset. Another important factor is discipline. Consistency requires commitment, especially when it is difficult. There will be moments where negative or inconsistent thoughts arise, particularly under stress. Discipline allows you to maintain your chosen mindset, even in these moments, reinforcing the patterns you are trying to build. It is also helpful to establish routines that support consistent thinking. This can include practices such as reflection, goal setting, or planning. These routines create structure, making it easier to maintain alignment between your thoughts and your action. Over time, they become habits that reinforce consistency. Accountability can further strengthen this process. Whether through self-monitoring or external support, accountability ensures that you remain aware of your thinking patterns and their impact on your behavior. It provides a mechanism for correction and improvement, helping you stay on track. As consistent thinking becomes established, its effects become more evident. Actions become more deliberate, decisions more aligned, and effort more sustained. These changes lead to improved outcomes, not through sudden breakthroughs, but through steady cumulative progress. This process highlights an important principle. Results are rarely the product of isolated moments. They are the outcome of repeated patterns of consistent actions guided by consistent thinking. By focusing on the consistency of your mindset, you influence the entire chain of events that leads to those results. Over time, this creates a sense of control and predictability. While you cannot control every external factor, you can control the patterns that shape your response to those factors. This control allows you to navigate uncertainty with confidence, knowing that your approach remains stable regardless of circumstances. Consistency of thought does not eliminate challenges or guarantee immediate success. What it does is create a reliable framework for progress. It ensures that your efforts are aligned, your decisions are intentional, and your actions are purposeful. This alignment is what transforms potential into actual results. And as this alignment strengthens, you begin to see the cumulative impact of your thinking. Small improvements in consistency lead to noticeable changes in behavior, which lead to improved outcomes. These outcomes reinforce your mindset, creating a positive cycle of growth and development. The key is persistence. Consistency is not built overnight, and it requires ongoing effort to maintain. There will be moments of doubt, distraction, or difficulty, but each time you return to your chosen mindset, you reinforce it. Each time you align your thinking with your goals, you strengthen the connection between thought and action. In this way, consistent thinking becomes more than just a mental habit. It becomes a guiding principle that shapes every aspect of your life. Influences how you see the world, how you respond to challenges, and how you pursue your goals. And through this influence, it determines the quality and direction of your results. Discipline is the bridge between intention and reality. But what makes it truly powerful is not intensity, it is repetition. Most people associate discipline with moments of extreme effort, bursts of motivation, or short periods of intense focus. But real discipline is quieter than that. It is built in the ordinary moments, in the decisions that no one sees, in the actions that are repeated long after the initial excitement fades. It is not what you do once that defines you. It is what you do consistently that shapes your life. Every person has intentions.